Have you ever stopped to think that many things that seem absurd today were once called education, care, or even love? That's right. The past wasn't just different, it was dangerously normal. And what's most unsettling is realizing how many warning signs were there, blatantly obvious, but nobody saw them. Or worse, everyone saw them and chose to ignore them. These old habits left clear traces, early warning signs, bodily signals, silent symptoms that were only recognized when it was too late for many people. The uncomfortable truth is that the body has always given warnings. Always. But the initial symptoms didn't come with sirens or instruction manuals. They appeared as discomfort, strangeness, intuition, those hidden symptoms that we learn to silence when habit dictates that that's just how it is. And that's exactly where the danger lies. Because most tragedies don't begin with one big mistake, but with small signs your body is telling you that someone decided not to ignore. Too late. In this video, you'll realize that many past practices weren't signs of strength, but rather of ignorance. And more than judging previous generations, the real question is, how many symptoms that you shouldn't ignore are still normalized today, right before our eyes? Because the silent signs continue to exist. The difference is whether you'll see them now, or only after the price has already been paid. Leaving children in the car while shopping. A few decades ago, leaving a child alone in a car was seen as something commonplace, almost a daily ritual of family life. No one talked about warning signs, much less early warning signs, because the risk seemed invisible. The adult would close the door, say, "I'll be right back," and drive off calmly, without noticing the bodily signals that would begin to appear minutes later. The heat would rise quickly, the air would become heavy, and the child's much more sensitive body would react even before any cries. These are silent, treacherous symptoms that make no noise, but exact a high price. The problem was never the intention, but rather the habit, and habit blinds. The attentive mentor observes that the body always speaks, even when the mind insists on minimizing it. Elevated internal temperature, rapid breathing, and rapid dehydration are initial symptoms that many people simply choose not to ignore until it's too late. A practical example. On a seemingly mild day, simply parking in the sun for a few minutes can make the environment dangerous. That's where the signals your body is giving you come in, even if you're not present to hear them. Today, simple practices save lives, such as creating visual reminders, leaving a personal item in the back seat, or using alarms on your cell phone. Small actions to avoid hidden symptoms with irreversible consequences. What this behavior reveals, fundamentally, is how the normalization of risk numbs human perception. When something is repeated many times, the brain stops registering the symptoms that you shouldn't ignore. The same pattern appears in other life situations. Trusting too much, reviewing too little, believing that it won't happen to me. These silent signs don't appear out of nowhere. They accumulate, and when someone begins to see this clearly, they realize that the problem wasn't just the car, but an entire inherited mentality of carelessness. And curiously, this same pattern appears in other old customs that today sound absurd. Playing with mercury as if it were a toy. There was a time when breaking a thermometer became a spectacle, not a cause for concern. The small silver spheres drew attention, mesmerized, seemed alive, and no one spoke of warning signs or early warning signs. The scene seemed harmless, almost educational, while the body's signals began to manifest invisibly. The danger didn't come with immediate pain, but with silent symptoms. Those that settle in slowly, without warning. Mercury doesn't burn the skin instantly, doesn't scream, doesn't bleed. It seeps in, and precisely for that reason, few learned not to ignore the risk. The mentor's observation reveals that the biggest problem with hidden symptoms is the false sense of control. Children push the little balls with their fingers, Adults watched curiously, without imagining that this contact was already one of the initial symptoms of something bigger. Mercury acts on the nervous system, affecting memory, concentration, and coordination. But all this happens silently. A simple example helps to understand. It's like breathing invisible smoke, thinking the air is clean. Today, any leak requires isolation, gloves, a mask, and proper disposal. This exists because we learned too late to listen to the signals our body is giving us. This story teaches us that not all danger comes wrapped in immediate pain. Some arrive stealthily, disguised as curiosity or playfulness. When someone learns to recognize these silent signs, they begin to see similar patterns in other old habits, things that seemed normal but hid profound risks. The past is full of such examples where the absence of fear did not mean the absence of danger. And curiously, many of these customs involved substances even more common within the home, using gasoline as a multi-purpose household product. For decades, gasoline circulated within the home as if it were just another cleaning item. Engine parts were washed in the sink, stains were removed from clothing, pests were fought in the yard, all without noticing the warning signs accumulating in the air. The strong smell was ignored, treated as something normal, when in fact it was already one of the most obvious early warning signs. The body felt dizzy, had burning eyes, headaches, but these bodily signals were swept under the rug. The risk didn't explode immediately and therefore seemed controllable. Once again, the silent symptoms did their work in the background. The experienced mentor knows that the most serious danger is the one disguised as usefulness. A single spark, a lit cigarette or a lit stove, was enough to transform routine into tragedy. Even so, many couldn't ignore the habit because it came loaded with custom and convenience. A practical example helps to illustrate this today. Using strong chemicals in enclosed spaces without adequate ventilation. The logic is the same. The body reacts before the mind accepts it. Nausea, confusion, and tachycardia are clear initial symptoms, but they are often dismissed as exaggeration. They are hidden symptoms only for those who choose not to look. This pattern reveals something deeper about human behavior. When something always worked, the perception of risk decreases. The problem is that the body continues to register everything. It sends signals that your body is telling you something, even when your conscious mind refuses to listen. Gasoline inside the house was just another chapter in this story of normalizing the absurd. And curiously, this same type of carelessness appeared in another familiar scenario, now involving children and the car itself. Children sleeping on the back window of the car. There was a time when the rear window of a car seemed like an acceptable spot for a child's nap. The sun warmed the space, the engine vibrated gently, and no one spoke of warning signs or early warning signals. What seemed like comfort concealed clear but ignored risks, while the body's signals began to emerge without an audience. That space became an improvised greenhouse, raising the temperature and constricting breathing. These silent symptoms gave no audible warning. They simply progressed. And since it was normal, few thought to ignore the danger. The attentive mentor reminds us that apparent comfort is not real safety. Children there were without seatbelts, without protection, exposed to sudden braking and collisions. A child's body reacts faster to heat and lack of oxygen, generating initial symptoms such as excessive drowsiness and disorientation. A practical example for today: never underestimate heated enclosed spaces, even for short periods. Ventilation, appropriate seating, and frequent breaks are simple actions to avoid hidden symptoms that only reveal themselves when the situation is already out of control. The body always sends messages. This age-old habit teaches us how design and culture shape dangerous behaviors. When something is allowed, the brain relaxes and stops noticing the signals your body is sending you. The change came when engineering and science prevailed. eliminating that flat space precisely to reduce risks. The silent signals were finally heard. And the curious thing is that this same spirit of improvisation and overconfidence was also repeated outside the car, now with homemade toys. Go-kart made with a lawnmower engine. There was a time when building a kart with a lawnmower engine was seen as creativity, not danger. No one talked about warning signs when a noisy engine was bolted to wooden planks. Enthusiasm muffled early warning signs, while bodily signals already hinted that something was wrong. Fear mixed with adrenaline, trembling hands, scattered attention. But this was interpreted as excitement, not risk. The silent symptoms hid behind the idea of fun and character building, and so many dangerous things went unnoticed. The wise mentor observes that unlimited improvisation often exacts a high price. Improvised brakes, unstable steering, and no protection turned that toy into a survival test. A single miscalculated turn was enough to cause initial symptoms such as impact, fracture, or trauma, but the lesson always came after the fall. A practical example for today: any activity involving speed or force requires proper equipment. Helmet, harness, and a firm structure are not an exaggeration. They are ways to avoid ignoring hidden symptoms before they become too visible. The body thanks you when prevention comes before the accident. This type of practice reveals how risk was romanticized. The absence of rules gave the false impression of freedom, while the body accumulated signals that it was silently telling you. Many only realized this years later, when chronic pain or limitations appeared as symptoms that you shouldn't ignore. The silent signals were always there, but there was a lack of listening. And curiously, this same normalization of danger also appeared in something even more subtle, linked to habits that seemed innocent since childhood. Sweet cigarettes, and the normalization of addiction. For a long time, giving children sugar cigarettes seemed like a harmless game, almost a cultural joke. No one talked about warning signs when an adult habit was miniaturized in sugar form. The gesture seemed silly, but it carried early warning signs that went unnoticed. By imitating the act of smoking, the child learned even before understanding, and the body began to register patterns. These are silent symptoms because they don't cause immediate pain, but they shape behavior. The danger wasn't in the candy itself, but in the repeated symbolism, something that many people chose not to ignore only decades later. An attentive mentor understands that the brain learns through repetition and association. When something is presented as fun, it creates mental shortcuts that are difficult to undo. The simple act of holding, inhaling, and exhaling sugar vapor was already one of the initial symptoms of conditioning. A practical example helps to illustrate this today. Normalizing alcoholic beverages at children's parties or games that simulate adult addictions follows the same logic. The body and mind absorb messages before reason. These are hidden symptoms because they appear much later when the habit is already established. This case shows how culture can numb the perception of risk. Collective laughter muffled the signals your body was sending you, while the industry benefited. When you learn to recognize these silent signals, it becomes easier to question traditional habits that no one has ever stopped to review. The problem rarely starts big. It grows little by little, disguised as normality. And this same type of cultural improvisation also appeared in something even more delicate, involving babies and overly creative solutions for sleep. Babies sleeping in dresser drawers. In times of scarcity, creativity was treated as an absolute virtue, even when it ignored obvious warning signs. Putting a baby to sleep in a drawer seemed like a practical, portable, and even ingenious solution. Few questioned the early warning signs because improvisation was celebrated. The baby's body, however, reacted silently, unstable surfaces, excess fabric, and poor ventilation generated bodily signals that didn't know how to ask for help. These are silent symptoms, dangerous precisely because they don't trigger immediate alarm. And so, risk was packaged as care. The mentor observes that good intentions do not negate consequences. Today, we know that soft and poorly structured environments increase the risk of suffocation, one of the initial symptoms that rarely gives a second chance. A practical example for today: following clear sleep safety guidelines such as firm mattresses, certified cribs, and the absence of loose objects. This is not excessive zeal. It is learning not to ignore hidden symptoms before they manifest irreversibly. The infant body is fragile and responds quickly to environmental errors. This age-old habit reveals a recurring pattern. When something worked once, it is replicated without question. The problem is that the body continues to emit signals that it is telling you, even when tradition dictates ignoring them. These silent signals were finally recognized when science and statistics prevailed. And curiously, this exaggerated reliance on home remedies also appeared in another ancient custom, this time involving pain, alcohol, and even younger babies. Whiskey to soothe teething in babies. For a long time, applying whiskey to babies' gums was seen as ancient wisdom, almost family advice. No one spoke of warning signs when the crying quickly ceased. The immediate relief masked early warning signs, while the baby's body reacted silently and deeply. The alcohol didn't resolve the pain, it only temporarily shut down perception. These are silent symptoms because they aren't accompanied by fussiness, only by an abnormally deep sleep. And because it seemed to work, many chose not to ignore the practice. An experienced mentor understands that speed is not synonymous with a solution. A child's body processes alcohol completely differently, and even small amounts can cause serious initial symptoms. Neurological confusion, respiratory depression, and impact on brain development are hidden symptoms that don't appear on the same day. A practical example for today: teething pain is treated with appropriate teething rings, gentle gum massages, and pediatric guidance, not with dangerous shortcuts. Listening to the signals your body is giving you, even when the body is too small to speak, is part of real care. This ancient custom reveals how tradition can silence the perception of risk. The crying that quickly disappears is deceptive, and the adult confuses silence with well-being. But the body never lies. It registers everything. The silent signs were there, simply ignored for generations. When someone learns to see these patterns, they realize that many old habits were not proof of strength or wisdom, but of ignorance. And understanding this completely changes how one observes the past, and the present as well. After all this, it's impossible to pretend you didn't understand. The past wasn't just simpler. It was full of warning signs that were normalized and ignored. What's most unsettling is realizing that this pattern hasn't stayed in the past. The body's signals continue to appear, the silent symptoms keep accumulating, and many people still choose to close their eyes to the early warning signs that appear every day. The body always warns. The difference lies in who decides not to ignore them. True change begins when you start respecting the initial symptoms, even when they seem too small to warrant attention. Almost everything that falls apart in life begins with hidden symptoms that simply needed an adjustment, a pause, a listening. The signals your body is giving you are not exaggeration, they are guidance. Ignoring them doesn't make you strong, it only makes you vulnerable in silence. The symptoms you shouldn't ignore exist to keep you alive, whole, and conscious. If this video opened your eyes, if any of these silent signs made sense to you, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. The next videos will delve even deeper into these patterns that almost no one talks about, but everyone feels. Stick around, because understanding the signs early changes everything.